it's just gone 11, so I think we'll start. Now, to make pasties, we've got to do it in 2 ways, because we've got to make the pastry, but we've also got to cook the filling as well, because obviously we're using root vegetables like carrots and potatoes, so they're going to need to be cooked out before we put them into the pastry filling. So as long as you've got your pastry ready to go, that's all good. We'll actually start off by cooking our filling, because we need to get it cooked and it needs to cool slightly before we can actually put it into the pastry. So it's a bit more technical this week compared to last week with the soda bread, and there's going to be a few more stages to it. So 60 grams of butter you're going to melt in your pan. Now you can either use a saucepan or a slightly deeper frying pan. I'm going to use the frying pan so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to put my butter in there, and then just melt your butter on a medium heat. And then the first thing that we're going to add is the onions into it. So if you're using gas, medium flame, you don't want it too fierce, we don't want to brown the onions, all we're going to do is soften them. And we'll cook the onions out probably for around 5 minutes, and then we'll add our other veg into it. So while that's kind of ticking over and softening, we can then start to make our pastry and try and juggle between the two, so a bit of multitasking, which we love. Obviously with pasties, if you were going to put meat in to the traditional Cornish pasty, you'd be adding beef into it. You could add some chopped ham into it, some bacon. You could add, add some herbs into it, spice it up a little bit, have a curried pasty. Morning, just joined. What are we melting? Okay, so in my pan, I've got 60 grams of butter. So it's not the butter that you're using for your pastry, it's the butter that you're using for the filling. So 60 grams of butter goes into the pan. And you just want to melt that. And into that pan then, the 60 grams of butter, we're going to add our onions and cook those off nice and slowly. Hopefully that answers the question on that one. So for those of you that perhaps fear of making pastry, prefer to just go and buy shop bought, if you've got that, that's fine. You can just hang fire for a bit while we make our own pastry. You could change the flour up. So obviously for pastry we use plain flour. We don't need it to rise, we don't need it to stretch. So plain flour is what we would need to use for our pastry. You could do 50-50, you could do 200 grams of wholemeal flour, 200 grams of white flour if you wanted. I've just got all white flour in there today. But I know flour is difficult to get hold of, so if you happen to have some plain wholemeal flour lurking in your cupboard, that's absolutely fine to use with some white flour as well, otherwise it tends to be a bit heavy and dense for pastry. Okay, butter's melting. It does something called, it starts to foam slightly. When it gets to that point, we're then going to put the onions in. Just keep cooking those out over medium heat. Now, other veggies that will be going in, once the onions have softened, we want to release the natural sugars that are in the onion. That's what's going to help give the flavour as well. We can then add our potatoes and carrots. I've cut mine, if you can see, very similar in size, because we obviously want them to cook at the same time. You don't want the veg in a pasty to be too chunky for 2 reasons. One, it obviously takes longer to cook. 2, it can break through the pastry once you're filling it as well. So try and keep it fairly small. If you've sliced and you've sliced thinly, that's fine. I tend to dice when I put things into a filling. We're not adding these just yet. We'll just, what we call sweat off the onions. So you're just cooking them off gently without colour. So we're not caramelising, we don't want them to go golden brown. That's going to be, if I put a timer on, I'll put my timer on for about 4 minutes and then we'll go back and check them. If they're on a nice low heat, you can just leave them ticking over and they will be absolutely fine. So while that's cooking, we can think about our pastry. Hopefully you've all got your bowl with your plain flour and your butter in there. You can put a pinch of salt in there as well if you would like to add a little bit of seasoning into it. The butter needs to be cubed, nice small pieces, and it needs to be cold as well, because what we don't want is for the butter literally to melt as we are going to rub it in, because then we end up with a really soft and kind of soggy pastry that just will not hold together. So making pastry on a really hot day is difficult. Making pastry if you've got really hot sweaty hands is difficult as well. What we usually say at school to the pupils that have got rather hot sweaty hands, make sure they run them under cold water first, just to bring the temperature down and dry them off, and then you can start. Traditionally they would say cold bowl, cold ingredients, cold hands. I've always got cold hands, so that's why I quite enjoy making pastry. So when you're rubbing in, you're going to be using the fingertips. So that's what we call the rubbing in technique, and you are going to work that fat, break the fat down, work it into the flour. Sounds really simple, but some people just really struggle to make good pastry, and it's all down to the conditions, so how cold things are, but also your technique. So if you're really rough with it, you're going to kind of work the fat too quickly, and it's not able to distribute and be able to be rubbed in into the flour. So take your time, fingertips only. Keep the palms of your hands as clean as possible. So literally it should just be your fingertips that are working into the flour. Just keep an eye on your onions as well. They shouldn't be colouring, they should just be cooking out nice and gently. So rubbing in, if you've just joined or you're a bit behind, using your fingertips, just break up that fat even into smaller pieces, and then use your fingertips and just work it in to the flour. Obviously you could use a like KitchenAid mixer with the paddle on. You could use a food processor with a blade as well. That's what I tend to do, but today I'll do it the way we would do at school when we're teaching. So everything nice and cold hands, and just keep working it through with your fingertips. If your onions look like they are starting to colour slightly, I'm just checking mine, then just turn them down a little bit. We want to soften them and cook them out for a little bit longer yet. If you wanted to, you could always put a little bit of garlic in with your onions as well. Again, just to introduce a little bit more flavour. I've kept the recipe really simple today, but like I talked about last week with the soda bread, you can always, one, use what you've got, and two, try and modify things. So if you like a bit of garlic, or you like some spice, or you like some herbs, put that in as well. So keep going. Every now and then, just give the bowl a little shake, and the lumps of butter will come to the top. Some people stop too soon. They think, yeah, that will do, and there's still lumps in there. You don't want any lumps of butter visible. You want it so that it looks like breadcrumbs or a sandy texture. Just gentle movements with the fingertips, just working it through. Once all the butter has been rubbed in, that flour then looks nice and golden. That's my timer for 4 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit more, and I'm going to pop my potatoes and my carrots into the pan. Just coat them well in the butter. Normally I would say only do one task at a time, make the pastry or make the filling, but just to keep things flowing this morning, we'll multitask. So we're going to soften the carrot and the potato just in the butter to start off with. Then we will add about 2 tablespoons of water into it as well. And then the last part of the filling will be the milk, the egg and the Marmite if you're adding Marmite. I know some of you don't like Marmite, which is fine. I tried the new peanut butter and Marmite mixed together yesterday for the first time. I quite liked it because I love peanut butter and I love Marmite. Marmite helps to bring out the flavour of the cheese. Same as mustard powder or a little bit of English mustard, that also brings out the flavour of the cheese as well. Okay, so we're getting there with the pastry. The lumps are getting fewer. The flour's starting to look more golden in colour, but I'm not quite there yet. I know some people don't like doing this because of the texture, how it feels when they've got to actually get their hands in and get it dirty. If you've got a food processor, do it. You know, it will do this process in seconds. And if you really don't like making pastry, buy a packet from the supermarket. It will save you time. It's not as nice. You can use margarine instead of butter. It needs to be a hard margarine, not one of the soft like flora spreads, because there's too much water added to those. So we actually need the fat content in pastry making to create something called plasticity, so how it will enable the dough to stretch. If it's too watery and too soft, then you haven't got a dough that is going to be kind of pliable and able to roll out. Right, nearly there. Potatoes and carrots are cooking nicely. If anyone's got any questions, just if you can and you've got free hand and you want to ask, just ping it up. I know there's a few people that are going to be watching this later. And I did set up a YouTube channel, which was completely alien to me, but I did set one up, and any kind of recipe video things I'm doing, I'm going to pop them there as well, because I can also use them as a teaching aid as well in the future. So situations such as being in lockdown have opened up other ideas as well, which is good. Oh, have I missed you putting in carrots and potatoes? Yes, you have. They have gone in now. So we cooked off the onions for about 5 minutes, and then I've added the carrot and the potato just in the butter in the pan. Okay, just giving them a gentle stir. Nicely. Just turn the heat down a little bit. So onions, carrots, potato are in the pan. If you've got any other veggies that you were going to use, like peas or sweet corn or anything else, you can put those into the pan now as well, along with 2 tablespoons of cold water. Well, it doesn't really matter about the water, but 2 tablespoons. I didn't quite do 2 full ones, so I've added a little bit to the third. So you could also, if you wanted, again, just add a little bit of stock into it, just to, again, give it a little bit more flavour. So cooking out nicely, nice gentle heat. So veggies are cooking. Pastry should be about ready. So again, give your bowl a shake. Any lumps will naturally come to the top. Just work those through again. And then Once you get to that point where it looks like kind of sandy breadcrumby texture, stop. You don't want to keep rubbing it in, because then you get to the point where you're overworking the dough and it actually starts to stick together itself without adding any water, so you'd then be making an unsweetened shortbread, which is not what we want. So when people you know, find that there's bigger lumps forming as they're rubbing in, it's because they're overworking it, and that often happens when you've either been too rough with it or your hands are particularly hot. Right, I'm going to stop there because I'm happy. So in a moment we are going to add our cold water into it. Now this is always going to be slightly different for everybody, just depending on how much you've rubbed the butter in, whether your hands have been quite hot. So the recipe would be roughly 3 to 4 tablespoons. Make sure you do measure in tablespoons as well, and add it gradually. So I usually say make a well in the centre, add 2 tablespoons, start to work it through, and then we can add the other 2. I'm just going to wash my hands and stir my potatoes. So this will be fine for a minute if you need to check on your potatoes and add any other veggies into it. So if you can see in there, they're cooking up nicely. It's not going to be completely cooked through the potato, but obviously when it's wrapped in pastry it will naturally create steam when it's cooking into the oven. If you haven't yet, by the way, put your ovens on now, there's plenty of time, and set them to about 190 fan assisted gas mark, between 5 and 6 if you've got a gas mark oven. Potato shortbread. No, I'm not making potato shortbread, I'm making pasties. If you overwork your dough, you'll turn it into shortbread. So, oven on, baking tray either well greased or with a sheet of greaseproof paper on there. Just make sure you get that ready. Being organised really helps in your workflow. Just keep that cooking out for a little bit longer. So the next ingredients that will go in to the pan, not just yet, but they will, is your milk. So you should have 60 millilitres of milk measured out, along with a teaspoon of Marmite if you're using it. If you don't want to use Marmite, you could put a drop of Worcester sauce in there or some mustard, and 1 egg as well. So when you're going to add the water into your pastry, to answer a question, you're going to add cold water. Make sure it is really nice and cold. Run the tap for a few seconds before you use it. Warm water is just going to soften and melt the butter too much, which we don't want. We'll go back to the pastry in just a moment. So egg, milk, Marmite, and you've also got your grated cheese. So that's going to be the last 2 sets of ingredients to go in. The first one that will go in with your potato is your egg, your milk and your Marmite filling. So I'm just going to take it over to the cooker, but not add it just yet. So they're still softening, you know, they're not soft enough to eat just yet. Well, the carrot would be, but the potato would be a little bit hard. So we'll just leave it going a little bit longer. And then when we add the egg mixture, we're going to pour it in and just stir it, and it will naturally start to thicken. As soon as it starts to thicken, take it off the heat, and then we can stir through the cheese. We don't want to put the cheese into the filling with the heat on. So if you've got any peas or sweet corn, put it in now if you haven't done so. I'm just going to leave mine with the carrots, potatoes and onions today. Also, if you want to season it, you can add a little bit of salt and pepper into it now. I'd be careful not to add too much salt because we're using cheese, that's naturally high in salt anyway. So just a little bit of salt. And if you're cooking with young children, avoid using salt altogether as a seasoning. So we've got two things going on now. You've got your pastry half ready, so we need to add our water in a moment, and you've got your egg and milk mix which we're going to add into the pan. So we'll stay with the filling for a minute because we can add the milk and the egg into it, stir it through and then turn it off, and then that's going to cool down a little bit whilst we finish off making the pastry and prepare it ready to roll out. So hopefully you're all getting to that stage. I'm going to pour my milk mixture in and then stir it through. And it will naturally start to thicken. Take it off the heat, and then you can put your cheese in. I did say 125 millilitres of cheese, but if you would rather add a little bit less, if you're not really into having it too cheesy, then you don't have to put that much in. You could halve it even if you wanted to. Obviously it adds flavour and texture as well. Pan's off now, stir the cheese through. And then we'll just leave that to cool down and we can carry on making our pastry. So when you've added your filling into it, obviously you don't want to cook it out too long on the hob. It was literally about 30 seconds. It started to thicken, take it off. The egg acts as a little bit of a binding ingredient, plus it adds richness as well. So this is obviously a completely different recipe to a traditional meat-based pasty, because that would have stock and you'd be making gravy that goes into it. So this is just an alternative of the traditional pasty. So I've got my knife. Making pastry, a bit like we did with, for those of you that saw it, yes, Marmite goes into, just answering a question, or Worcester sauce, or and seasoning if you're adding that as well. Mix that in, turn it off, leave your filling just to cool down. We'll come back to the pastry. So make a well in the centre. Start off by adding 2 tablespoons of water. I'm using a knife, same as what I did with the soda bread last week, and just kind of cut through and coat that flour butter mixture into the water. Then I'm going to add another one, do the same again. And it really does depend on how warm your room is, how soft the fat is, to how much water you're actually going to be making. Yes, the filling should be a little bit set. that's absolutely fine. Don't forget, when it goes back into the oven, it naturally will create some steam when you're cooking the vegetables, and the cheese will obviously melt again. So I'm adding another one into the pastry. That's 4 tablespoons that I've added into it. Now at this point, I'm going to clean the knife off, and I'm going to use my hand, and I'm going to try and bring it together to form a ball of dough. Now if it doesn't feel like it wants to stick together, add a 5th tablespoon in, but no more than that at this stage. Now this stage of bringing the pastry together when you're doing it by hand is really important, because this is where you can overwork it. If you're too rough and tough with it, then you end up with a really tough pastry. It won't be nice and short, and we are making short crust pastry, so we want it to have that kind of melt in the mouth feeling. And if you overwork it, it becomes tired, and it's not going to feel like that. Now I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon in there, and just bring it together, work it round the bowl. I'm only using one hand as well, one hand to support the bowl, one hand in, and just keep going until it comes together to form a ball of dough. I think I even find I'm going to need another one in there. It's too dry. Ooh. And then you always get those bits at the bottom, you want it all to stick together. If you're using wholemeal flour, you will find that you will need at least another tablespoon of water, because obviously it soaks up the water because of the fibre content. Okay, it's coming together but still not quite there. I don't think I've been doing level tablespoons. I used a different spoon today. You know, you have a favourite measure. This isn't my favourite one. I don't think it's as accurate. That's it. Okay, so it's coming together now, and you want to get it into a ball, and then we're going to move it onto the worktop. It's always a good thing to add the water like we are, little by little, because if you follow a recipe and it says it's going to have 4 tablespoons in, and you add it all in, and your circumstances of heat of the room and things are slightly different to what the recipe was like when it was devised, you could be in trouble, because then it could be too wet. Okay. Now, unlike bread, we don't want to knead the dough. Plain flour doesn't have a high gluten content, so it's never going to be stretchy. That's not what we're doing, but we do need to just work it just so that it sticks together. Try not to be too heavy-handed and rough when you're doing this. Try and keep it as light as possible. If it still feels a little bit crumbly, what you can always do is just dip your hand in the jug and just do a few flicks of water on there, and that's usually just enough to bring it together. And then once you've done that, tip it out onto your table. No flour on the table at the moment, and just work it into a nice neat shape. There we go. We're going to divide this up anyway in a moment, so don't be too fussy. I just shape it into a round. Okay, hopefully you are all at that stage. Filling is just cooling down nicely, and then we're going to divide this. It's up to you how you do this. This should make around 4 pasties, so it might be easier if you divide it into 4 pieces and then roll each one out individually. Some people prefer to work with like half of the dough at a time, just roll it out and then cut their circles out of it, and do the same with the other half. So I'll leave that decision up to you. We are going to be cutting it into rounds. You can either freestyle it and just shape it with a knife, or you could use a plate as a template, depending on what size you want to use. Right, so I'm going to cut mine into 4. If we have any left over after we've rolled it out, you can re-roll. It's not always the best the second time it's been rolled because the pastry starts to become tighter and tired and overworked, and you tend to find those ones are a little bit kind of tougher when you eat them. Okay, so you will need a little bit of flour on your table, and you will need your rolling pin now. I tend to just leave a little pile of flour at the side, and then I can just sprinkle it on. You don't want too much flour down because it will dry the pastry out and kind of suck out all the moisture, but you want enough so that it doesn't stick to the table. Now, rolling out pastry is some people's nemesis as well because they find it sticks to the table, sticks to the rolling pin. What I always say is just slide the rolling pin in a little bit of flour. Make sure there's lightly dusted flour underneath it as well. And because we want to roll it into a round, we'll start off with a roundish shape. Technique for rolling. You are going to do 2 rolls. This way it shouldn't stick to the rolling pin and it shouldn't stick to the table. So imagine you're rolling towards 12 o'clock. So forward and back, and then stop, and then turn it a quarter turn. And each time you do those 2 rolls, you'll turn the pastry round a quarter turn. That way it should never stick to the table. If it feels like it's starting to stick, just sprinkle a tiny little bit more flour. Now we're rolling out to roughly the thickness of a £1 coin. It's always a good measure for your thickness. If it's too thick, you're going to get a mouthful of pastry when you eat it. If it's too thin, it's going to break when you go to put that filling in there. And if you need to just dust a little bit more flour on the rolling pin, then you can do that as well. So 2 rolls, forward and back, turn it round. This is exactly what we teach at school, and the pupils find it works, and it does. So just keep that dough moving. It should always be able to slide on your workbench. Some of you might be really familiar with pastry and know what you're doing. Just ignore me and carry on. But for some of you who perhaps don't make pastry very often, right, I'm at the point where I've got the right thickness, so I'm going to go for bad boy pasties. So I'm using a larger plate. Put the plate on, use the point of a knife just to go round and get a nice neat finish, neat shape. Somebody said on here that they use the leftovers to make jam tarts. Yeah, absolutely. Anything like that. Never waste it. When I work with pupils and they have some left, they'll say, oh, shall I throw that away? And I'm thinking, no, don't waste it. Okay, so you've got your round. If you want to do another one as well, and then we can work 2 at a time, just slide that, make sure there's a little bit of flour underneath, it'll be fine for a minute, and then work on your second one. Same process again, little bit of flour, slide the rolling pin in the flour, and keep going. So if you were making a pie, for example, same recipe. This is just a traditional short crust pastry recipe, so it can be used for sweet or savoury dishes. 5 mil thick, yes, that's fine, Katie. So keep going round, slide it in the flour, and just 2 rolls, quarter turn. Don't forget to keep turning it. The minute you forget, it will stick to the table. If it sticks to the table, you're going to end up with holy pastry, which then the filling's going to leak out of. Okay, turning it round. And then we can use our template again. Some of you might have a particularly large cutter that you're using. Obviously you can do mini pasties as well if you wanted. They don't have to be this size. Traditionally, I'm sure some of you know, pasties originated in Cornwall, and it was what the miners used to take down to the mines, and they'd have one end filled with the savoury filling and then one end filled with jam, so they had their kind of dinner and pudding all in one piece. They could carry it, which is why the pasty has that kind of handle style at the top. A bit bigger. And they would keep as well, and everything was safe, so it was kind of easy for them to eat. Right, when you've got the second round, use your plate again, pop it on, same process again. Filling will be cooling down nicely now. If it's too hot, the potato filling, and we go to put it into the pastries, all it does is soften the pastry and makes the pastry go all soggy. So that's what I've got left over at the minute, so I will have enough for some more pasties if I've got enough filling, or I'll get someone to make some jam tarts. Okay, so I'm going to start to show you how to fill the pasties, then I'll go back to rolling out the rest of the dough, just in case some of you are getting ahead and want to move on. So make sure you've got your egg wash ready. So that was what the second egg was needed for, beaten, and a pastry brush as well, because that's going to be used to seal our pasty. And then I'll bring my filling over, I'll stand it on there, and I'll bring my first one to the table. So filling, you want the filling to go in the centre, and what we're going to do is actually be folding it from one side to the other, not quite so that it meets, because then you're going to take the edge over and press it together, but I'll show you that in a minute. So don't overfill it. Temptation is to always put more in than we actually need. We don't want to do that, because if you overfill it, when you go to fold it over, it will burst out and oozes out everywhere. So just have a little test run when you've done it. Can you pull it from one side to the other without it oozing out everywhere? Just spread it around. Right, that's absolutely fine. So egg wash, you're going to just seal around one side and then bring that over. Leave about 1 centimetre. So you're bringing, I don't know if you can see this very clearly, bringing it over like that, so you've left 1 centimetre on the bottom piece. So where you've lifted the fold over, leave 1 centimetre and just press that down with your finger to create a seal. We're going to kind of double seal it, and then what we can do, where you've still got that egg that should be showing, you're going to take the corner and just fold it in, so it feels like you're going the wrong way. And then as you're going round, you can then, and just fold it kind of finger width as you're doing it. And this is what gives the pasty, so if you can see, it's that sort of fold. So you're just like tucking it over as you go round. And if your filling's still feeling a little bit hot, you could carry on rolling out the rest of your dough. There. So that's pasty number 1. You've made a little turn as you go round. We're going to egg wash the top and then pop it onto our baking sheet and then move on. The idea is that you just encase that veg, or meat if you were doing a meat one, as well as possible, so it doesn't seep out during cooking. And just lay that onto your tray. Do the next one. Take my pastry. Egg wash half of it. If you egg wash the whole circle and then try and stick it together, it ends up sliding all over the place. So only ever egg wash like half of it, because you're then naturally bringing one on top of the other. Filling in, egg wash half, and then pull that over. Remember to try and leave a centimetre gap. Go along and press down, keeping that filling tightly in there. Don't be afraid to press sort of firmly when you're doing this bit, because that's the first seal. I always turn it semicircle, sort of facing up, and then tuck that corner in. That's really important because that just then allows you to do these folds and just go round, and as you do it, just use your, I always use my index finger, just twist it and fold it and just press it in. And then you've got enough egg wash on there to stick it together. Traditionally, this is the way the pasty would be made. Some people like to, use a fork to go round if you want to do it that way. I just tend to find it doesn't hold it together as well. Brush the top again. Now last week when we were talking about soda bread and we were talking about glazes, I said you can use egg, you can use milk, or you can use water as a glaze. To get that really nice golden sort of yellow colour which you get on a pasty traditionally, you'd want to use egg wash, which is just a beaten egg, or for a really rich colour you could just use an egg yolk. Do we just egg wash around the circumference, getting mass in there? Yes, so half of it though, only half. Otherwise it slips and slides when you go to fold it together. Okay, so I'm going to go back to rolling. So I've got 2 on the tray already. You can see they're decent sized pasties, so I used side plate as my template. Didn't actually measure it. So 2 rolls when you're rolling out the pastry. If there's more than one of you in the kitchen, you can get a bit of a production line going on this. Someone can be rolling, someone can be filling, someone can be folding. But the idea with the veggie pasties, it's great because whatever you've got in your fridge, it can go in. Traditionally, it would have turnip or swede in it as well, along with the potato. But I just kept it simple for this today. Okay, template again. On, round, cut it, pop your leftover pastry with the rest, so we can come back to that in a minute if we've got enough filling, and then repeat the process. So the dough at no point is sticking to the table because I've got just enough flour, don't want too much, otherwise it dries the pastry out, and just using those turns every time you roll it out, it will stop it from sticking to the table. Okay, so filling in. I can't wait to eat one of these. I think I'm going to have to run about 10 miles to burn this off, but it's all good. Would sweet potato be okay, or is it too soggy? No, sweet potato would be okay actually. Just don't overcook it when it goes into your pan. But it has a similar sort of cooking time to carrots, so no, that would work okay. Okay, half brushed with egg wash, fold it over, leave that centimetre gap and press down firmly. Because you want to create that seal so that it looks like that. Tuck the corners in and then start to make those folds. Twisting it and then just folding it over as you go round. And that's creating your little handle almost. I know there's variations in Cornish pasties. Some people say you'd never put swede in, some people say they would always put turnip in. Today I've done neither. Actually, because I haven't got any swede or turnip. Right, again, encased, good egg wash on it. Not the bottom, just the top. Just the bit that you see. And then pop it on your baking tray. Then we'll do the fourth one, and then with your leftovers you can decide whether you make extra if you've still got some filling, or you save it and make some jam tarts when you're finished. Right, need a little bit more flour. So what we have made in this is a traditional short crust savoury pastry, but that can also be used in sweet dishes like things like jam tarts, Bakewell tarts. So it's a really versatile pastry. As long as you use a hard block, whether it's butter or hard margarine, that's absolutely fine as well. Obviously butter's richer in flavour, so it does tend to give a better flavour, but it costs more. So keep rolling round, 2 rolls, 1, 2, quarter turn, just keep going like that. If your rolling pin is sticking slightly, just slide it in a little bit of flour. I tend not to dust the top of the pastry with flour because I find that dries it out, and if it dries it's going to crack, and if it cracks you can't fold it. Keep going, use your template just to check, are you there? That's absolutely fine. And then roll out. Thickness roughly equivalent to a £1 coin. There we go. So they're all my offcuts, so I'm going to be able to make probably one more out of that, but don't expect the leftovers one to be as easy to handle and as kind of melt in the mouth as the others. Right, last one out of the 4 that we've made properly, filling in the middle, and the same again. Now as these cook, the filling is going to carry on cooking as well, because it's encased, it's going to help to steam the veggies that are in there. Okay, back again, egg wash half, and repeat. You could do the same process as well if you wanted to make sweet ones. You could cook off some apple, for example, pear, anything like that. Sweeten it up, add some cinnamon. You could always stir in a few cake crumbs or bread crumbs into it as well to just soak up a little bit of the moisture, and then pop that in for like an apple turnover. That's always an easy option. But pastry is one of those skills, once you've mastered it, it's easy to do. But so many people say, oh no, I can't make pastry. But it's just doing the right techniques at the right time. Don't forget to fold those corners in and just press it in, be a bit brutal with it. That's the time to be. You've encased it in. I've got waves from outside. And brush it with egg wash. And then pop it on your tray. Leave a little gap on the tray as well. And then the final one, it's up to you. I'm going to make one because I've got enough filling. So I'll show you how the dough will be. A little bit rougher and a little bit tougher to roll out, but you know what? It's all edible. It'll all be fine. But you will notice a difference if you was to taste test between the first roll and then the one that's been rolled out already. You'll see it changes colour slightly as well. It goes slightly darker. Why does yours look 100 times better than ours? Because because I've had lots of practice. That's it. 2 rolls again. You'll find you have to work a little bit harder as well with the second lot of pastry that you're rolling out, because it does become tougher. So roll it out. I'm only going to get 1 out of this anyway. Some people make like some cheese straws or something. If you had any leftover grated cheese, you could just egg wash, sprinkle the cheese on, pat it down, cut it into strips and twist them up. Kind of a cheese straw. Okay, plate on again. Just about got that one in. It was tougher to roll out. It feels tougher now as well, even just to go through and trim. And then take your plate off and repeat. Hopefully you've all got a little production line. No one wanted to help me. At least you know you're going to be fed today, which is good. Doing pizza tomorrow. Okay, last one, egg wash. You know the drill. Egg wash half, fold it over, leave a centimetre gap. This is the kind of probably the most important bit, in that you make a good seal on the first fold over, and that you don't overfill it. Okay, press it down, start one side, fold the corner in at a right angle. The maths people are like that. And then twist and press in, twist and press in. This is, imagine you're making a little handle. You might find it's a little bit more brittle to handle as well, this pastry. It doesn't look as pretty as when you first make it. There we go. And then when you get to the end, don't forget to fold the other one in as well and just pinch it in. Brush it with egg wash. And pop it on your tray. I'm going to have to get another tray because I've filled that one up already. So, pasties on the tray. What you need to do then is just to make a little slit in the pastry just with the point of a knife, and that's just to let some of the steam out. So we want to steam the veg whilst it's in there, but if we don't have a little air hole in there, then that steam builds up and